Good evening, everyone. I'm Omar Qatari, and I'm the Managing Director of the Global Development Institute. And I'd like to welcome you to the official launch of the Institute and to thank you very much for joining us in these celebrations. The event is also being live streamed, so I want to extend a very warm welcome to our viewers online from all around the world, and I hope that you're much warmer than we are here. To begin the official proceedings, I'd like to introduce the President and Vice-Chancellor of the University of Manchester, Professor Nancy Rothwell, who's going to chair the event. I hope that you have a very enjoyable evening. Thank you.
So thank you, Uma, and thank you all for coming. A very warm welcome to the University of Manchester to what is an important occasion for us. Global development is a great strength of the university and has a long history here and in the city. Indeed, we decided some time ago that we should identify what are the major strengths in research and education at the university and chose 5 themes as our beacons. Addressing global inequality was one of those. Recognizing the world-leading role that our academic staff, our research programs and our students have in development. Our outstanding Brooks World Poverty Institute, funded by Rory and Elizabeth Brooks, and the many, many international students who come through those programs, together with researchers across largely, but not exclusively, humanities, who address various different aspects of inequality, whether it is inequality of economics, of wealth, of position, of health, of access to education. This also fits in very closely with one of the 3 university core goals. The first of those goals is outstanding research and innovation. The second is education for our students, the lifeblood of our organisation, and producing graduates that will be changing the world in the future. And the third goal is social responsibility, and that means about changing the world and making a difference. Now, much of that we do through our research programs, such as that in the Global Development Institute, but also through our education. Some of it, though, is through our student volunteers and our many other programs. It feels right that a university in the city of Manchester with our history should address global challenges. Manchester has a long history of social change, dating back not just to the Industrial Revolution, but of course also to the suffragette movement, to many new movements that began in this city. Just a month or so ago, we had a large number of Fulbright scholars. These are scholars supported from the USA who work across the UK, and they spent 2.5 days in Manchester. They saw the history of Manchester, they saw the future of Manchester, they saw the university, and the write-up that came from them of their visit was quite remarkable. They had not realised just how much was happening in this city that is around global challenges and how much is relevant to them back in the United States. We're very privileged this evening, of course, to have Winnie Byanyima, who's going to give our address and do the official opening of the Global Development Institute. And I'll welcome her a little more detail in a few moments. But I would like to just give the floor for a few minutes to Professor David Hume, who is the co-director of the Global Development Institute, to give you a flavour of what it is about and what it will be doing. So David, thank you.
Global Development Institute in a nutshell. I think, as Nancy said, the Global Development Institute has roots that go back a long way into Manchester's intellectual history. The university has a strong tradition of radical and critical social science, and we build upon that. When you look back at the university, then particularly some of its strengths come from the work of Arthur Lewis, the Nobel Prize winner, the first black professor in the UK, who made major contributions to development economics. And there's a whole series of colleagues who we've been able to build on the work, build on the breakthroughs that they made. The Global Development Institute brings together 2 institutes, the Institute for Development Policy and Management and the Brooks World Poverty Institute. Both of these institutes have got reputations for what they do and have been running for periods of time. The Institute for Development Policy and Management has been running for almost 60 years. Its 60th birthday is coming up fairly soon. It's had more than 10,000 students graduate from it. They have moved into more than 100 countries, and it has networks that go around the world. The Brooks World Poverty Institute is somewhat younger. That was set up about 10 years ago with the support of the Rory and Elizabeth Brooks Foundation, and it's particularly focused upon the issue of world poverty and looking at the causes of poverty and at poverty reduction. IDPM and BWPI have been collaborating together over the last 10 years, but we've reached a stage over the last year when it made sense to come together and to form a single institution. And so we are bringing the strengths of both of these institutes together because we think that this will allow us to achieve much more than we've been able to achieve already. The collaboration that we've been taking on so far has put the university into first place in the UK in terms of the policy impact of its research on international development, and our recent standing is the third university in the world in terms of international development. The goal that we're setting ourselves is by 2021 to get to the #1 place in those global rankings. Bringing together the strengths that we can do, we will be creating and sharing knowledge that can improve the human condition, as well as looking at the metrics. We'll have 45 academics and more than 100 PhD students, 450 master's students. So we have a very large body of people who are working on international development. That gives us a critical mass to really be able to look at the global challenges that we're facing. And Winnie Byanyima will be talking about some of these global challenges in more detail in a few minutes. We're emphasizing the global nature of the challenges that humanity faces in our title because of the increasing interconnectedness of everybody. Whether one looks at flows of goods or flows of services or flows of information, in Europe we seem to be particularly concerned about flows of migrants at the moment. But what is happening at the local level, what is happening at the national level is intimately connected with what is happening at international and at global levels. And we're planning on tracking these things from the local roots right the way through to the global forces which are also shaping them. How will we make this contribution? How will we strengthen what we're already doing? First, through our research and its links to impact. Our motto will be rigorous research that is socially relevant, but we will plan on achieving and continuing to achieve the highest academic standards, but working out how we can ensure that our work contributes to improvements to the human condition. That's through a multidisciplinary approach, by working in co-production with civil society groups, with social movements, with NGOs, with think tanks, and with governments, so that we collaboratively produce knowledge that can actually impact on policy and impact on practice. We have a couple of close links, in particular with Slum Dwellers International, a federation of national associations of people who live in slums across Latin America, Asia, and Africa. And we've worked with SDI to help them develop the methodologies which they use in more than 20 countries now. With BRAC, Bangladesh's largest NGO, but an NGO that is working internationally in 13 countries. We've worked for more than 25 years helping them to look at what they're achieving and to redesign their programs and to be able to take what they've achieved into a much broader public by publishing and writing about what they've done. The second way in which we'll achieve our goals is by establishing the Rory and Elizabeth Brooks Doctoral College, and this was established last November. The students in the Doctoral College, numbering round about 100, will be producing excellent theses. If you do a PhD at Manchester, you've got to produce a very good thesis, but they'll also be having a series of career-enhancing activities around that will take them into looking at how they might improve the impact of their work, how they might be able to reach out to policy communities, how they could use the social media and other forms of communication to take their messages out. I think we've got a photograph there of the opening of the Doctoral College there. Third we shall take forward our work through our master's programs. We've got well over 400 master's students, and we'll be working on how we can take forward both what we do in Manchester with them, what we do with those students who are learning through distance learning and off-campus activities, and through the links that we maintain with them once they've graduated. By linking our research with our teaching, then we're able to ensure that we've got cutting-edge content to the teaching, and we can also help to raise the aspirations of students who can see that they can be part of these processes of global knowledge creation. Last but not least, we're going to be focusing on our alumni. As I said, there are more than 10,000 alumni. We have relationships with them, but we're going to look much more closely at how we can help them to develop chapters, to appoint ambassadors, and how we can work with them. Working with them so that they can help us in our research, working with them so that we can provide them with continuing professional development. We've got, as I say, 10,000 alumni, but there are some outstanding alumni that we've got. Many of our alumni have run to very high positions. I was just going to give a few seconds to Sami Gitau. Sami Gitau comes from Kenya, and as a teenager, he came across the glossy brochures that we used to produce for advertising master's courses at IDPM. And he decided he would like to come to Manchester and to this place called IDPM. He managed to complete his higher school education, and some of his relatives helped to pay for him to get through university, and eventually he managed to win an equity and merit scholarship at this university. He completed an excellent master's degree, and he's now back in the slums in Nairobi, running an NGO that works particularly with how to improve the services for the poorer households in that community. So he's managed to sort of go through the full academic cycle. It's a real privilege for me to be able to, in a way, talk about Sami, talk about what we have achieved and what we hope to achieve. But one's got to realize that that's been built up on the efforts of colleagues, of academic colleagues and support staff who've put so much effort into giving IDPM such a strong reputation, subsequently developing the reputation of the Brooks World Poverty Institute. And there's a whole team of people who've been working on this. Over the last 18 months, they've all gone the extra mile, because setting up a new institute requires a lot of extra work, and they've all put their shoulders to this effort and have taken it forward. So to finish off with, I was just thinking, I thought, well, why is it that they do it? Why is it that so many colleagues are working after their hours are finished, or working over a weekend to help establish this Global Development Institute? And it's because they think Manchester can be at the centre of creating ideas and knowledge that can tackle some of the great challenges of our time, that this university can actually make a significant contribution to trying to improve the world in which we all live. Whether one's looking at climate change, where the university already makes major contributions, whether one is thinking about the instability which international finance creates, making great wealth for some and creating poverty for others, and whether one is thinking, I think, about the subject which Winnie is going to look on now, at the way in which the wealth that is being created seems to be being concentrated, sometimes in relatively small numbers of hands, whilst poor people are getting relatively limited access to the wealth that is being created. Just before we move on to Winnie, then, I think we have Joe Stiglitz, a Nobel Prize winner with whom those of us at the Brooks World Poverty Institute have had the privilege of working over the last 10 years, and he had a few words.
One of the reasons I'm particularly enthusiastic about this new center is one of its points it's going to focus on is inequality, a subject on which I have been spending much of my time over the last 5 years. There has been enormous growth in inequality within most countries around the world. There's been an increase in global inequality. I think it's absolutely imperative that we understand the causes and the consequences. We understand what we can do to reduce this inequality. And I believe that these problems can't be approached just through the lens of economics. They will have to be addressed through the kind of multidisciplinary approach that has been the hallmark of Manchester.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. I can see quite a lot of people standing at the back. If you could move in a little bit at the edges, we might make a few seats. Or if you want to go outside, come down the floor and sneak in. There are some seats at the front. I don't want you to have to stand all the way through. So see if we can manage to fit all those people in. So it's my great pleasure now to welcome our guest of honor, Winnie Byanyima. I'll just pause while you take your seats. Thank you. There's a few right on the front. Okay, have we all got a seat? So many of you will be aware of Winnie's great achievements. She's currently the executive director of Oxfam International, but she is a real leader in women's rights and in addressing women's inequalities. She served for many years in the government of Uganda. She's worked with the United Nations, and she's also worked with the Millennium Development Goals. Winnie has, throughout her career, attempted to address issues of inequality. So it is appropriate that tonight she's going to talk to us about this, and very appropriate for our Global Development Institute that this is the topic she should be focusing on. David spoke a little about our alumni, who are very important to us, and some of you here will be graduates of this university. Of course, Winnie herself is a graduate of the University of Manchester, for those of you who are not aware, in aeronautical engineering. I'm ashamed to say that I struggle to find female role models in engineering, and now here is a fantastic one who I can assure you we will be using again in the future. So it's fantastic that you're back. It's great to hear that some of the buildings have changed and we've modernised, but also that you recognise many of the older buildings, including the one that you trained in, the Simon Engineering Building. And it's fantastic you're back, and let it not be so long before you come back to visit us again. I think it will actually only be a few months, from what I know. So, Winnie, you are most welcome. You are an ideal person to be presenting to us this evening at the inaugural event for the Global Development Institute. Winnie, thank you.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. Vice-Chancellor Dame Nancy Rothwell, the Executive Director of this new institute, Professor David Hume and your co-director, distinguished guests, friends. I feel greatly honored to be invited to speak at the launch of the Global Development Institute, and I bring you greetings from Oxfam. Oxfam shares with this institute their vision of a socially just and sustainable world in which all human beings have opportunities to flourish. We share that vision. Manchester has a proud history of radicalism. It was here that tens of thousands of unarmed men and women marched in 1819 to demand greater freedom, only to be charged by the army and hundreds killed in the massacre of Peterloo. It was also tens of thousands of ordinary working people in Manchester who signed petitions and joined the campaign for the abolition of slavery. This is a city that has always known whose side it's on. I arrived at this university as a refugee from the brutal dictatorship of Idi Amin in Uganda. I was an angry girl, having to leave my family, my friends, and the university where I just started. But it was my experience here in Manchester that gave me the opportunity to turn my anger into activism. Upon arriving, I joined other students in various societies. We organized, we protested, we got involved in fierce intellectual debates. We supported the anti-apartheid struggle and the decolonization struggles in Africa at that time. I was particularly active in the movements to support the liberation of Zimbabwe and Namibia, and I made lifelong friends here. It was here in Manchester that I was also exposed to global feminist thought, and I was active in the international society, and through that, got very attracted to the anti-dictatorship struggles that were going on in Latin America at the time. I was studying aeronautical engineering, as you've been told, and I spent many, many hours in the John Rylands Library. But if I'm to tell you the truth, I was not sitting in the engineering or fluid mechanics section. I was in the Africa section, reading African history, politics, social anthropology. That's where I used to sit. Manchester grew me into an activist. I developed skills here that lasted with me until today. So I'm very glad to be back here, and I feel deeply honored to have been asked to speak at the opening of this very important institute. I've been asked to talk about inequality and the future of global development. Some of you may have read our recent report, which we published a few weeks ago, showing that the world's 62 richest billionaires now have more wealth than the poorest 50% of the world put together. That's 3.6 billion people. The wealth of these 62 individuals has gone up by $500 billion in just 5 years. 1% of people now own more wealth than the rest of the other 99% combined. A global economy has been created that works for the few at the expense of the many. Far from trickling down, income and wealth are flowing upwards at a frightening rate. Such obscene levels of inequality make no moral or economic sense, especially when we know that almost 1 billion people are still going to bed hungry at night. These are the challenges we must confront. Just after I got back from Davos in January at the World Economic Forum, I spoke with a colleague of mine at Oxfam who had himself just come back from Myanmar. He had been interviewing young women who work in factories producing clothes for high street brands like Primark. Is that how you say it? Primark or Primark? Primark. H&M and Gap. These women are members of labor rights organizations with which Oxfam works. They work 6 days a week, sometimes 7, sometimes working up to 23 hours a day. They earn less than $4 a day for their labor. They struggle to make ends meet. They frequently fall into debt. If they get sick, they don't get paid. And if they get pregnant, they lose their job. I mentioned before how 62 billionaires have more wealth than the bottom half of the world combined. Well, 4 of those 62 have made their money primarily out of the garment industry, including the head of Zara and H&M. It's an industry within which big firms are consistently using their dominant position to insist on poverty wages for those at the bottom of their supply chains. Between 2001 and 2011, 10 years, wages for garment workers in most of the world's 15 leading apparel exporting countries actually fell in real terms. And I don't have to tell you that the reward at the top of these companies skyrocketed. 90% of garment workers in Myanmar are women. 53 of the 62 richest people on earth are men, including all 4 of those who made their billions in high street fashion across the world. Women are the ones who are in the worst paid and most precarious jobs. Countries where the gap between the poor and the rich is more extreme are also countries where the gap between women and men is greater. What is clear then is that the fight for gender equality and the fight against economic inequality are sister struggles. When we released our report this year on inequality, one of the criticisms leveled at Oxfam was that we are anti-capitalist. We are told the multi-billionaire heads of the high street fashion houses and the young women Oxfam met in Myanmar last week sewing clothes are all part of a huge global success story. And Oxfam is being churlish to say otherwise. In one way, they are right. Those young women are living above the globally agreed extreme poverty line of $1.90 a day. So they are officially no longer counted as poor, but their lives are still unacceptably tough and miserable. Is this what success looks like? What kind of a world are we thriving for? I was asked here to speak about the future of global development. We know, we agree that there's been remarkable progress in the past 20 years in reducing the number of people who live below that extreme poverty line. The first of the Sustainable Development Goals, agreed just a few months ago in New York, is to end extreme poverty, using this same measure by 2030 of $1.90. If we achieve that, it will certainly be a remarkable feat. But can that be enough? Can it? I don't think so. When my colleague met those garment workers in Myanmar, they were spending their one day off every week learning about unionization and what other workers like them had achieved through collective activism in nearby countries like Thailand and Bangladesh. For them, $4 a day is not enough to have any real choices or to be rid of the fear of debt. These women aren't asking for a life of super yachts and private jets, but they are demanding for a life of dignity and freedom. These women must be at the heart of our vision of the future of global development. We owe it to these women and to millions more like them to do better. We need to create a human economy that works for people rather than the other way around, people working for the economy. We need a human economy rather than an economy for the 1%. It's that idea of a human economy that I want to talk a little more about. The human economy will require big ideas, new ideas. I don't think those ideas will come from the CEOs whom I meet in Davos and the big politicians. Many of them are good people with good intentions, but it's hard for them to see a new path. It's exciting to hear the head of the World Bank, for example, talking about the dangers of inequality and the urgent need to tackle it. I believe that Jim Kim is a man of real integrity. And yet, the same World Bank continues to promote policies which can only further fuel the wildfire of inequality that is spreading across the globe. Policies such as privatization and user fees in schools. These risk denying millions of poor children, especially girls, from having an education they need and deserve. And every child, every girl who is excluded from school because school is not free is a criminal waste of a future. Let me tell you about my own background when I was growing in Uganda. There was a girl in my class called Agnes. She was the cleverest girl in my year, always finishing at the top of our class, despite often having to miss school because she had to care for a sick family member, or because she had to collect water, or because she had to harvest crops, many reasons. Agnes was a girl. Agnes was a refugee from Rwanda. Agnes was poor. And those three factors intersected to mean that she never had a fair chance in life. She did well in our primary school leaving exams, despite all the obstacles in her way, but she never made it through secondary school. She couldn't afford it. I'm saddened when I think of where Agnes probably is now, still very poor, still working very hard to look after her family, still with no options for her life. And I'm haunted by how unfair this is for her, but also for the rest of us. Just think what we are all missing, because we never get to see everything that someone like Agnes could have achieved. Think of the talent, the innovation, the creativity that we are missing out on. Think of how many scientists or engineers are pounding maize or fetching water as we speak. Think of how many doctors, teachers are herding goats or digging the dry earth. Imagine a fairer world where we could harness that talent and every child had a chance. Imagine what we could achieve. Our vision for the future of global development must include finding radical new ideas to tackle this grotesque inequality of opportunity and this short-sighted squandering of our greatest asset, the brains and talents of humanity. So where can we look for these big new ideas? One answer will be universities. We must not underestimate the power of academia. It was the work done in universities and think tanks that laid the foundations for the rise of neoliberalism, what the governor of the Bank of England calls market fundamentalism, the ideology of which has come to dominate the world so totally in the past 30 or 40 years, creating untold wealth for a few, whilst driving levels of inequality that hadn't been seen in 100 years. I was here when the yuppies came on the rise of the yuppies and the economy of the few who could make it. Such a seismic shift would not have been possible without academics laying the groundwork. Universities must again be ready to play their part to take the world in a new direction, but a better direction this time. The human economy for Oxfam is one in which governments act on behalf of the majority and not in the interests of a tiny but powerful elite, in which people are valued equally and not disregarded on the basis of their gender or color or caste, in which we ask how the economy can work better for women and not the other way around, in which businesses show as much concern for their workers, their customers, and the communities within which they exist as they do for their shareholders and boards. It's an economy where the astonishing advances of technology become something to be welcomed and celebrated by all, rather than something to be feared because it will mean job losses for workers and more wealth for those who own the machines. I would like to say a little more now about each of those three areas: government, business, and technology. On government, we know that poverty and extreme inequality are not natural, falling down from the clouds like rain. Extreme and widening inequality is a failure of government. It's the product of political and economic choices, Almost 4 decades ago, governments, prompted by the market fundamentalists, began the process of economic liberalization and deregulation, and it continues today. As governments took more of a backseat, a privileged few, particularly those who had ready access to capital, were able to push ahead, driving today's inequality crisis. In giving economic freedom to those at the top, it is as if government has forgotten about the freedoms of all the rest. It's as if the teacher has retreated to the classroom and left the bullies in charge of the playground. That's how it feels. At the same time, across the world, we have seen a narrowing of democratic space in country after country as governments clamp down hard on democratic freedoms of the majority. These two forces are linked. Extreme inequality and democracy cannot coexist for long. There has to be a choice made, either greater equality or less democracy. Government after government is making the wrong decision on this. Accountable democratic government is the most powerful equalizing force that humanity has ever invented. It is at the heart of the human economy. That's why we must fight for governments to be accountable to their citizens and not the vested interests of big business or the super rich. Governments must be bold in standing up to those interests and in using all the tools available to them, including taxation and public spending, to actively tackle economic and social inequalities. There are examples we can look at for inspiration here. Take Brazil. Brazil is one of the few countries in the world where the income of the poorest 50% actually has been growing at a faster rate than the income of the richest 10% in recent years. True, there's still a long way to go in that country, but it is encouraging to see the positive impact of some very sensible and actually not very radical government policies, such as a higher minimum wage, more progressive taxation, increased investment in essential public services, and social protection programs. Nothing is more powerful in fighting inequality than universal health care or education. Think of the power of the National Health Service, giving everyone in Britain, rich or poor, the freedom from fear of sickness. An amazing institution. You know, sometimes I want to jump out of my office and join those junior doctors who are striking to defend the National Health Service. International development has focused very much on aid. Aid will remain important for many countries for a long time to come, especially for fragile and conflict-affected states. But ultimately, governments in poorer countries must be able to mobilize their own resources and be able to account before their own citizens how they spend those resources. First, for this to be possible, citizens everywhere must pressure their governments to reject global trade agreements that risk making companies more powerful than governments. And citizens must push governments to radically reform global tax rules that are making it so easy for the richest individuals and the biggest multinationals to avoid paying their fair share of tax in the countries where they operate. Because this is only shifting the burden of taxation further onto the least able to afford. Multinationals are blackmailing governments to give them ludicrous tax breaks with the threat of taking their operations elsewhere if governments don't concede. This is driving a race to the bottom on tax, much like the race to the bottom that we are also seeing on wages, on workers' rights, and environmental sustainability. It's estimated that the poor countries are losing at least 170 billion every year because of tax avoidance, just the legal ways that companies can avoid paying fair share. This is more than the total amount that these same countries are receiving in aid. We are seeing a huge groundswell of public anger against tax dodging, and also some progress against it. We must keep up the fight against the Googles, the Starbucks, and the billionaires who are paying lower tax rates than their secretaries or cleaners. We must continue fighting. So on business, responsible businesses must have a central role to play in our vision for a human economy. Many have pointed out that the private sector must invest in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. But it's also sensible to identify which goals are most appropriate for the private sector to invest in. Of course, a goal like sustainable energy makes sense, but there are goals which must truly remain publicly funded. Universal health, for example. Experience shows that the only way of ensuring decent public services for all is when governments take responsibility for delivering them, and for citizens to hold those governments accountable for how they deliver. The role of the private sector here is primarily to ensure that they pay their taxes. We are often accused, Oxfam, of being anti-business. This is not true. We work with many private sector actors to find innovative ways to help those in need. A great deal of our work is with communities around the world, involving helping them to develop their own businesses and gain access to markets. Let me give you an example. In East and Central Africa, we enjoy eating cassava leaves. And the diaspora, our people, when they leave Africa, they still want to eat cassava leaves, which are not there in Europe and America. So in Rwanda, we worked with one very enterprising man who had realized that if he could find a way to dry these leaves and make them non-perishable, he could export them to diaspora communities around the world and create a business for himself. Oxfam helped him to source and buy a bespoke processing plant. The businessman then made an agreement with women farmers groups to buy cassava leaves from them at a fair price. Now, more than 2,000 women farmers in this area in Rwanda have increased their incomes and keeping their children in school. One of them told me when I met her recently that, very proudly, I don't have to ask my husband for soap and body cream. She can afford it. And the businessman has become a wealthy exporter to Europe, to Canada, to USA, and even Australia, exporting cassava leaves. So we are not anti-business. What we are against is a kind of business that puts profit above all other considerations, and as a result, decides to pay poverty wages because you can get away with it, decides to stash money in tax havens rather than contribute to the society on which the business depends, or businesses that decide to cut corners rather than ensure sustainability of the environment, or businesses that actively lobby for the opportunity to abuse their workers and destroy the planet. They put billions of dollars to lobby the European Union, the Congress in America, to push for higher profits and to damage the world and keep wages down. We are certainly anti these kinds of businesses, and we bash them, and we don't regret. But we also invest in thinking creatively about different ways of running the private sector companies, where workers could have more of a controlling interest, for example. So this could mean, for example, these are some of the ideas, creating more democratic decision-making processes within companies. If you take an example of a country like Germany, pay ratios in that country haven't spiraled upwards in the way they have done here in the UK or the United States. And that's because employee representation on remuneration committees prevents that from happening. Employees sit on remuneration committees, so more democratic decision-making. But we could take it even further. Employee ownership models are on the rise in many countries. These cut the distance between decision makers and those impacted by the decisions. At Oxfam, we are proud of our role in supporting cooperatives such as Amul in India, which is the largest milk brand, and is jointly owned by 3.6 million Indian dairy farmers, the largest milk brand. These are businesses that, when successful, automatically share value and profits with workers and farmers, rather than with shareholders who are often remote from the reality of the business or the community within which it exists. So there are new ways, there are other ways to do business. The current model is not a fixture in time. We can change models of business, and we think creatively about that. Third, technology. As new technologies continue to be developed, the question of who controls them, who stands to profit from them, becomes ever more important. Technological progress is at the heart of the human economy. Technology has incredible power to liberate. I think of the power of electricity, grinding cereal or pumping water, releasing women from countless hours of backbreaking work and allowing children to stay in school. We must build societies in which the arrival of new technology brings hope and the promise of shorter working hours, less backbreaking labor, better quality of life. But right now, most countries are far from that. We've been doing a lot of work with tea pickers in Assam, in India. With a little support from us, they've been successful in driving up wages and their working conditions. But now, their bosses have said to them that if wages go up anymore, they might decide to invest in machines that can take the place of the tea pickers almost entirely. Whole communities would become jobless with no realistic prospect of finding alternative employment without moving into the cities, in the slums, hundreds of miles away. Our human economy must strike a careful balance when it comes to the interest of innovators and the public interest. Of course, it's right that there should be fair reward for those who pioneer new technologies. They invest significant sums and take risks in the process. That's why there's copyright law and intellectual property protection. But there must be limits to it. Such patents can create monopolies, allowing their owners to accumulate vast wealth that is wildly disproportionate to the investment they've made. When it comes to access to medicines, an area we've worked on again at Oxfam, the imbalance can too often be akin to a death sentence. The current R&D system is skewed towards rewarding innovation at the expense of people's health, and it undermines the human right to health. We saw an extreme example just a few months ago when an American former hedge fund manager bought the patent for a drug called Daraprim, which treats a life-threatening parasitic infection. The new owner bumped up the price overnight from $13.50 to $750 a tablet, instantly ensuring that it could not be available, or it could only be available for the rich. Martin, I can't pronounce his name, Shkreh, the CEO of Turin, the company that bought the drug, he said, I want to quote him, when he was challenged about this, he says, no one wants to say it, No one is proud of it, but this is a capitalist society, capitalist system and capitalist rules. This was his answer. We also saw this in the unaffordable prices of HIV treatment a few years ago, and we see it now in the medicine to treat hepatitis C, which costs $1,000 a day. $1,000 a day. So how rich must you be? This is completely unacceptable. Nor is this only a problem for developing countries. New cancer medicines are now reaching the market at prices that are unaffordable, whether in Europe or in the United States. So the current global R&D model has failed patients all over the world. Pharmaceutical companies justify their high prices by the need to recover their R&D costs. Yet, the actual R&D cost is kept secret, and the companies ignore the fact that a lot of the research is often done by public money in universities and research institutions. There's a real issue there. So one of our greatest campaigns was standing with others to face down pharmaceutical companies to ensure generic companies could compete to reduce the price of HIV medicines from $10,000 per patient per year to around $100 today. Because of that campaign, millions of people are alive today. In a human economy, we need a new approach entirely. We must separate the financing of R&D from the pricing of medicines. It can't be left to pharma industry to cater only for those who can afford to pay high prices, practically deciding who lives and who dies. And finally, the human economy must be one that lives within the boundaries of the planet. Oxfam has demonstrated that whilst the poorest people live in the areas hardest hit by climate change, the poorest half of the population are responsible for only 10% of global emissions. It isn't the most vulnerable and poorest people who have caused the climate crisis. Take my peasant uncle, I like to use him as a point of reference, in his village in Uganda. It will take him 180 years to register the same emissions as an average American would in 1 year. 180 years. Our broken economic system is not only failing to deliver for the majority, it's destroying the planet for our children and our grandchildren. We have the ability to live within our planetary boundaries with the technology we have. That is why, for Oxfam, the fight against extreme inequality and the fight against climate change are joint struggles and against the same enemy, a dangerous, destructive economic system that has to change and change fast. So these are just some of the questions that an institute such as the Global Development Institute might seek to answer when defining a human economy, instead of the economy we are living in now. How do we create a more human economy which works for women as well as men? How do we make sure that governments are accountable and act in the interests of their citizens rather than the multinational corporations and the super rich? How can we support and grow the kinds of businesses that will contribute positively to societies within which they exist? How can we ensure that technologies make life better for the world's poorest rather than leaving them still further behind? How can we ensure that inequalities of wealth do not translate into inequality of access to life-saving medicines? How can we preserve and protect the planet for future generations? How can we create a world in which both extreme poverty and extreme wealth belong to the history books and become relics of a bygone age? In defining the human economy, we need big, bold new ideas. We will be ridiculed as naive, envious, seditious, or all of that. See that as a badge of honor, at least I do. Once upon a time, the idea of workers only working an 8 or 10-hour day seemed impossibly radical. The idea of having a 2-day weekend was out of the question. Paid holidays, not a chance. And yet most of us now take these for granted. So those garment workers in Myanmar are doing all they can to make such ideas for themselves too, and we must support them in that. Manchester University has a great history of radical thought, as Professor Hume has reminded us. It has a history of supporting the struggles of the oppressed. I had my opportunity here to support the anti-apartheid struggle, an opportunity I hadn't had in my country, Uganda. But here, with university students here, we were picketing and asking the university to take its money out of Barclays Bank. Manchester University has a history of supporting the struggles of the oppressed. Once again, the question you must ask yourselves now is, what does success look like for you? For what it's worth, I think the success of this institute will be measured, at least in part, by whether or not the work and ideas that you produce resonate with and feel relevant to the struggle of those garment workers I talked about, and to the millions of others like them, who are sitting below or just above the so-called poverty line, and who have the odds stacked against them, but who also are determined to imagine a more equal world and a better future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Winnie, for an insightful and thought-provoking lecture that also, I think, sets very clearly the research agenda for the GDI for at least the next years to come. And I think it would be fair to say that aeronautical engineering's loss is global society's gain. Winnie has kindly agreed to answer some questions, so I invite the audience now to put questions to Winnie, or indeed to David, about what GDI will be doing. And if you'd like to signal you'd like to ask a question, I believe we have roving microphones, so could you wait until one gets to you? They're waving at you now. Who would like to begin? Question down here. You just wait for them to run to you. Come on, come on, come on.
Richard Bond, freelance consultant and long-time associate of IDPM. Winnie, thank you for posing that ideal of the human economy. It certainly seems to be the case that 200 years of growth economics has given us this obscene concentration of wealth and the exploitation of the many. Proving that link, we perhaps have to ask Joseph Stiglitz. But there is another mechanism in place here. It's clear that the growth economics is inextricably linked to the burning of fossil hydrocarbons, which we now know are dangerously destabilizing our climate. And of course, that impacts on the poor, first of all, and we believe we're approaching tipping points where we're all going to be in trouble. This is an important message. Oxfam has a long and respected history in relief, development, and advocacy. Our politicians talk growth, growth, growth. Who is going to bell the cat? Is Oxfam willing and, at the moment, able to lobby government on this when the current government is talking about gagging NGOs?
Winnie, do you want to comment? I think your microphone should be on.
It is on.
Good. Do you want to respond to that or note it as a comment?
Yes, but maybe I just want to say that Oxfam has been going through a huge internal change process because we realize that we're not going to change the world by continuing to do business the way we have done it. Being with communities, supporting small communities to find clean water, build classrooms, and that we really must go out there and tackle power. Inequality is an issue of power imbalance. And we must recalibrate power and go to business, go to governments, and increase the power of people over them. And for that, it's very political. It's about campaigning. It's about influencing. And we're determined to do that, but we can only do it with people. So we are back to constituency building. We are back to public engagement. We are investing more of our effort in building huge constituencies with students, with workers, working to support the growth of social movements against injustice. Our work that was very much around fighting poverty in communities is becoming less and less. And our work to challenge inequality, to restore the right power balance between people, business, and governments is increasing.
Thank you. Other questions? One down here, and then we've got two over there, and then I've got two over there.
Great.
Yes.
Hi there, my name is Zakib, and I am a geography student at the University of Manchester. I take a module called Development and Inequality, and it's very fun, but it's probably the most depressing module that I have ever had to take. And sometimes when you're faced with these huge problems, you just want to shut the book and stop reading. So my question is, seeing as you seem to face and work with these problems on a day-to-day basis, what wakes you up in the morning and what motivates you to keep facing these problems day in, day out, and still maintain a smile?
It's a great question.
Okay. Should I answer that? Or
Yes, if you would wish to, yes.
Well, what motivates me and what inspires me is finding connection with others who are challenging injustice. Like last week, I just came back from a tour in Zimbabwe and in Kenya. In Kenya, we went to a slum, in Kibera, one of the biggest slums in the world, actually. In Kibera, I met women who are not sitting down and letting go, but who are fighting every single day, fighting with tax collectors, fighting for a better life for themselves and their children. I sat with them and their stories of how they get up at 4 in the morning to buy their little stock, the struggles to get the stock in the market, the struggle to pay the rent, the struggle to pay for water, to pay for the toilet, and how they navigate all that and organize as a group to fight back. These are the stories that make me feel that I'm really a warrior at the back and they're on the front lines and I need to stay right there fighting for them. I hope I answer your question. I'm inspired by the struggles of poor people themselves.
Thank you. Question over here.
Hi. I speak to you as a very proud daughter of Africa. My father was from Port Harcourt in Nigeria. My grandparents and the generations before that are from Sierra Leone. So I've been to 13 different African countries on 8 different visits, so I have some insight and knowledge. And as a proud daughter of Africa, it pains me to say this, but the first time I went to Nigeria in 1991, the first thing that hit me was the have and have-nots. That I had two aunties. One lived in Victoria Island in Lagos. She had a husband was a bank manager. They had a driver, a chauffeur, a house girl, this, that, and the other. The other auntie lived in a tiny shack without electricity. 9 of them, most of them sleeping on the floor. In Port Harcourt, which is one of the richest states in terms of oil, it should be one of the richest states in the whole of the world. It's got an abundance of oil. Yet you saw people, literally, you could walk down the street in Port Harcourt and look in a hole, and there was literally people living in that hole. Yet you look that way and people were driving Mercedes and living in mansions. So what I would say from that, it's okay saying that we should all have, everything should be spread out, but if you can't even do it on your own doorstep, I feel embarrassed sometimes because I know sometimes the perception of Africa is it's this corrupt little dictatorship, and it isn't, because I've been to 13 different countries and much of it isn't like that. But the Western perception is that it's this little corrupt. But when you see it at your first, I saw such things there, that how people were ripping each other off, even their own people. And sometimes it was because people were different tribes. And one of the worst things...
Shorten a little bit.
Yeah.
We've got quite a few people want to ask questions.
To me, it's okay saying this, that, and the other, but I've seen it that even within their own countries, we can't get the balance right. Does that make sense to you?
Thank you. Sorry, I don't know do you want to comment or not?
After a few.
Yeah, after a few. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, can I ask people to keep their questions quite short so we can get as many as possible in? We've got one I'm going over there, and then we've got one right at the back.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Cinderella. I'm from Uganda and studying MA Global Development at the University of Leeds. Winnie Byanyima, you raise very critical questions and reflections, some of the things that I've studied in global inequalities and development. And one of the challenges you raise is global inequalities and democracy cannot exist for so long. And in the global south, we are witnessing civic spaces and liberties of people being crushed and taken up by government. And my question is, how can we young scholars and emerging development practitioners use our energies and opportunities to create change, to influence positive benefits for our communities when we go back to Africa or wherever we are from? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take a couple more. I think I've got a couple over on that side, one at the back and then one further down. Hello? Yes?
Is that working?
Sorry, just behind you first, and then we'll come to you. No, that's fine. The lady there, yes. And then we'll come down to you, sir.
Thank you for a very inspirational speech, Vinny. My name is Christina, and I'm from Denmark. I'm a first-year student at Politics, Philosophy, and Economics. It was very comforting to hear a person with such experience as you still believing in a radical world change. Even though I've only been at university for half a year, many professors have found it odd that I've been so demanding and about changing the world. I've heard many times, why are you still, you're at university now, you should know, we're pursuing academia, but changing the world is a bit, outgoing, a bit radical. You should maybe, take it easy. So one of the last things you addressed in your speech was that we should merge academia with Oxfam, like with organizations that create actual change, because this is one of my worries. How can I, as a first-year student at university, still have the hope for creating an actual change and not just writing academic journals the rest of my days? Thank you.
Thank you, and I think we'll take one down here, then we'll
okay, thanks so much. Philip Dearden from the University of Wolverhampton Centre for International Development and Training. Just talking about radicals, I'm very pleased to say that back in September, University of Wolverhampton gave Claire Short an honorary degree. And at the end of this, Claire Short said to me over an honorary sort of dinner we had, she said, academics are completely out of touch with development. And it made me really think, is that actually true or is that actually false? Last week, I was at the PricewaterhouseCoopers International Development Conference, attended by no less than 30 DFID staff. Shame on them, in my opinion, but they were all there. And the minister, the highlight of this event was the minister wafting in for 10 minutes, literally 10 minutes, and I'll quote, not verbatim, but basically, he came in and said, only the private sector can deliver jobs, only jobs can deliver growth, and only growth can get people out of poverty. And I just wonder whether you would like to comment on that, and the state of DFID today, and whether we are being radical enough as academics.
Thank you. Winnie, would you like to comment on any or all of those?
Yes, very interesting ideas here. First about my sister from Nigeria, who originally from Nigeria. I often compare Nigeria with Bangladesh to make the point about inequality being a result of political choices. Do a bit of homework and look at the health and education outcomes for the two countries. You'll be shocked. Nigeria is now a middle-income country. They declare themselves so. But half their people are living in poverty. If you look at the school achievement rate, completion rate at primary school, if you look at the infant mortality rate, Bangladesh beats them, and it is almost half as rich as Nigeria. Why? It's the choices that the government makes, where it invests in the public services or not. So often, do you know that Africa now, 6 out of the 10 most unequal countries in the world are from Africa? This poor continent is also a very unequal continent, second to Latin America. The most unequal country in the whole world is South Africa. And touching on the problem of growth, growth is good. Everybody wants growth. It's not a debate about growth. It's about who captures the growth. So let's not confuse things. We all want growth, but we want growth that is shared by all. So the debate is about sharing the growth. And that takes us to rules being rigged in favor of a few at the top. But if rules are right for everybody, then growth can be shared and can even be more. This is the argument of the IMF now. Before, we were told that it's a choice between distribution and growth. Now, the same IMF is telling us that no, actually, growth which is more shared, which is more inclusive, that actually reducing inequality is good for long-term growth. That gross inequality slows growth. So now it's a different story. We have affirmation from new economic thinking of the mainstream economic institutions, but it is not yet going into policy. Let me give you an example to show you how this growth is not shared and is hurting our people. South Africa in 1993, the top 10%, they had a total income of $37 billion, 37 billion in 1993. By 2011, this same 10% had moved their income up to about 54 billion. They had increased it by about 64%. Now, the bottom 10% in 1993 was at $1 billion. In 2011, it was still at $1 billion. Had not moved at all. So the growth was captured by the top. The bottom was getting nothing out of the growth. And this is free South Africa. And remember, this 10% at the top are mostly the same white people who were privileged before, during apartheid. So who is benefit from the fruits of independence? You know, the growth has been captured. The rules are skewed in favor of the top. And that's why we say that the most important thing is for people to break this political capture and get governments to make rules of the economy that work for all. That's why, for us, that is really at the heart of this. On universities, scholars, you produce knowledge, you share your knowledge. I would say that continue to apply yourselves to answer these questions about how do you make growth benefit everybody and sustainable without crushing the futures of our children. But the other part is how to share it, put it in the hands of those who can use that knowledge to make change with you. Thought and action need to come together better for us to change the world. And that's why I was excited when I heard Professor Hume saying that increasingly you're going to be working with civil society, with NGOs, with those who are on the ground also producing their knowledge, but who are also acting in action with. So to me, that's where the solution lies. I'm an incurable optimist. I'm also a rebel. And I think it takes rebels in academic institutions. You're well protected in your towers. You can be rebellious in how you think. And it takes rebels like me in activism who can take knocks and feel happy to keep knocking corporations and politicians. It takes us being rebellious and working together.
I don't know if David wanted to comment, but in the meantime, can we get a microphone right up to the back?
Quickly sort of add to that, but building on the pins, our colleague's question from Denmark about merging academia and Oxfam, certainly the Global Development Institute, I mean, the sophisticated terms we use are co-production and knowledge platforms, but it means basically finding colleagues in Oxfam, Save the Children Fund, BRAC in Bangladesh, Slum Dwellers International, and working with them with our comparative advantages. The great advantage of an academic is you can actually work with data sets, you've got the training, and you can actually look at the evidence in detail. There are many great advantages that NGOs and civil society movements have, but that's often in terms of communications and messaging. And if you look, certainly the points that Winnie's been making about inequality, well, she's actually using a data set that an academic called Anthony Shorrock started off about 20 years ago in the UK and has developed at the World Institute in Development Economics. Come, I think, to this room on March the 22nd, we have Branko Milanovic from the New School in New York, the world's best measurer of inequality. And the data he's using, the arguments that he's making are academically sophisticated, but they are being condensed into these messages here. So it's possible without merging them to actually see the ways in which these two worlds can collaborate. In terms of our colleague here who was a bit depressed, don't be depressed. I was going to say sort of be happy and angry, but Winnie, I think, said be optimistic and a rebel. But in a way, that's what you need to be. Look at the data. If you were to choose a day to be born on for the average human being, today is the best day. Today, your income is likely to be higher in real terms than at any other previous time in history. Despite all the bad things that are going on, you're likely to live longer, on average. This is not for everybody, but it's across, and it's much less likely that your child will die while you're growing up. But be angry because we are an incredibly wealthy world. We can do much better with the resources that we've got. After you've got your first billion, does it really add that much to your life to have a second billion? You know, maybe we could share it around.
Thank you, David. Recognising the time, and we're due to give Winnie a break, I'm just going to take two. Can they be short questions, please? One right at the back and one right at the front. And I'll ask Winnie to answer, and then we'll close.
Hello, my name's Matthew Amy. I'm a third-year international relations student and a good friend of my depressed man, Sakib, at the front. A slightly selfish question, because my third-year dissertation is on this subject of celebrity humanitarianism. And I was just really interested to know what Winnie thinks of the celebrity humanitarianism movement. Does she celebrate that the regular person is getting involved and the kind of popular engagement that it creates, or does she despair at the kind of oversimplification of the problem and the kind of stereotypes of Africa that are created? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to take one last quick question right down at the front. And while you're racing down, I'll just relate briefly, talking about the second billion, hearing a talk by Bill Gates. He claimed he was going to write a book for many wealthy people, which was called How to Live on $100 Billion a Year. Yes.
My name is Peter Solis. I'm retired, but I used to have an office above the laundrette on 274 Bambi Road for about 11 years. So I used to work for Oxfam, basically. You alluded to corruption, but you didn't make explicit the issue. How do you see the fight against corruption in the new global economy?
Okay. Do you want to answer, Winnie, and then we'll let people...
On celebrities and their role, increasing role in humanitarian work and even in development work. I'm a realist here. Recently, I was invited to an event, a dinner hosted by Melinda Gates. And I actually wanted to turn it down, but they followed me everywhere and made me feel so important. So I turned up and was even given a slot to speak at this big, big dinner which had prime ministers, billionaires, and I spoke. Later on, I asked one of the vice presidents, and I said, but this is a great honor you've given me. Why did you give me such a space? And he said to me, you see, we have looked at who is influential globally on women's rights. And you are ranking there. I said, okay, that's an honor. I think I've put many years in this work. And then he said, but you see, although you are ranking there, we've also found that the real influencers on women's rights are not people like you. It's in fact the other people who were at the top table, like Emma Watson, like the first 9 people in the world who speak and actually cause people to follow them on women's rights are not people like me who've spent my entire life fighting on women's rights. It is celebrities, and we want to make change. And we know that it's a lot around tackling social norms. It's about going for the hearts and minds of traditional leaders, cultural leaders, of young people themselves. So it's about working with whoever is influential. And celebrities, because of their power and their influence and the media, are influential. So it's, for us as Oxfam, we work with them. But we spend a lot of time trying to bring them to have a deeper understanding of the cause of the issues of social justice and the structural causes of, say, war and conflict, or El Nino, or whatever. So we work a lot to deepen their understanding and to fight with us in our struggle. We need them. That's my answer. We need them. And they want to work on it. They want to be a part of it. They are a little bit crazy because they think you know what I mean. But you just have you work with it. It's about building movement. On the issue of corruption, I didn't talk about corruption. I talked mostly around tax avoidance, for example, which is it's legal, but I see it as corruption too. And very often, the two are mixed, but they are not the same. When rich individuals and companies rig the rules of the game, it doesn't make it morally right. And I see it as corruption that a billionaire like Warren Buffett should keep telling us that I'm paying more tax than my secretary. I mean, he's a good man. He sees the inequality there. He sees that a rule has been bent in order to make him have advantage. But there is corruption, which is breaking of the rules and which is illegal and which must be tackled. And again, corruption is about impunity. It's really about rich and powerful companies, individuals knowing that they can break the rules and get away with it. They can find a way to break the rules. So for us, the two are really the same. It's about abusing power. It's about having too much power and getting away with abusing the power you have. So I don't talk about corruption as such. It's a huge issue. The issue that many people don't see is that actually even what looks legal is unfair and corrupt too. So I spend more time there.
Thank you. This evening has been an extremely important event for the university in our launch of the Global Development Institute, and I do want to thank you all for coming and sharing it with us. In a moment, I'll invite people to go downstairs to join us for drinks, but I'd like to finally ask that we all show our appreciation to Winnie for her great presentation.